Bright Duty. Every student matters.
So now we have an analysis of the colonies and the slave trade. So how slave trade became an important source of labor in these colonies. So by late 15th century and early 16th century, the Europeans had explored the whole of Caribbean and America. So by this time, all these places in America and the Caribbean region was explored by the Europeans, and the discovery of Americas by the European had unprecedented effects. So the effect or the consequence of this discovery is something which is very important. This is something which you must understand and make it clear in your mind, that the influx of gold and silver helped the Europeans to further expand international trade and to establish more industries. So with the influx of gold and silver, because we already saw that in the American region, those places were rich in gold and silver reservoirs, and this hold over the gold and silver in bulk helped the Europeans to expand international trade and establish more industries, because a lot of profit they could get from these places and they used it to expand trade. And between 1503 and 1660, that is in the 16th and the 17th century, Spain received from America a total of 18,600 registered tons of silver and 200 tons of gold. So this is such vast amount of gold and silver they were getting from America. That is only the registered amount, and the unregistered bullion is like large blocks of silver and gold smuggled into Spain had been variously estimated to 10 to 50% of the total. So along with the registered gold and silver, there was unregistered smuggling or illegal trading of gold also happening, which was again a large amount. And the countries bordering on the Atlantic Ocean, particularly England, France, Belgium and Holland, took advantage of the discovery. So not very late, this after Spain and Portugal, we see countries along the Atlantic like England, France, Belgium and Holland also takes advantage of these discoveries, and their merchants set up joint stock companies and send out trading expeditions. So the merchants set up stock companies, joint stock companies, and starts sending out trading expeditions. And they also established colonies and introduced the Europeans to the product of Americas. So like Spain and Portugal, the other countries bordering Atlantic also starts colonizing these parts of America and starts trading in the products which they get from America. And the native people of America suffered the most by discovery of their land by the Europeans. So we already saw the tragic consequences for the native people. The Europeans physically decimated the population, that is, destroyed the local population. So destruction of the local population is what this confrontation resulted in. And they destroyed their ways of life, enslaved them, that is, made them slaves, and made to work in the mines, plantations and mills. So this is what Europeans did to Native Americans. And there was a sharp decline in the population of the natives of their own countries. So the population went down in 2 centuries. And for instance, before its conquest, Mexico had a population between 30 and 37.5 million, and their Andean region a similar number, while Central America had between 10 to 13 million. And at the time of the arrival of Europeans, there were 70 million natives in America, and about 150 years later, their numbers had been reduced to 3.5 million. So from 70 million, the number gets reduced to 7.5 million. And the causes responsible for it were mainly warfare and spread of epidemics. So because of the wars which they had to fight with the Europeans, and the major villain was the spread of epidemic like smallpox, it all resulted in the tragic extinction of the Native Americans. And the population went down from 70 million to 3.5 million in a period of 150 years of the European conquest. And the Europeans destroyed two major civilizations, those of Incas and the Aztecs. So we already saw how Pizarro leads the conquest of the region of Incas, and for Aztecs how this explorer Cortes takes the lead in conquering the parts of the empire of the Aztecs. And the nature of warfare and terrorizing the local inhabitants psychologically and physically played a crucial role in the ruin of the civilization. So the nature of warfare, like the access they had to gunpowder and the horses, helped them be more efficient, that is the Europeans to be more efficient, and they could easily defeat the local population who didn't have access to these techniques. And they also terrorized the local people, which kind of psychologically and physically made the local people weak, which led to the ruining or the ruin of the native civilization of America. And the worst consequence of the European colonization of America was the enslavement of the natives, or turning of the people into slaves. And the capitalist system of production played a havoc with the lives of the slaves. So this new system of production, which had gained popularity by this time, was the capitalist mode of production, which single-handedly developed on the basis of making large profits with cheap labor. This was the funda of the capitalist system, where profit for individual was preferred with cheap labor and exploitation of the laborers. So this was what the Europeans did when they established colonies and then forced the people to work as slaves and cheap labor for production of more goods. And the working conditions were horrifying, but the Spaniards regarded the exploitation of slaves as essential to their economic gains. Although it was cruel and unjustifiable, still the Europeans considered it as essential to make more profit. And in AD 1601, that is in the first beginning of the 17th century, King Philip II of Spain legally banned forced labor, because there was a lot of criticism against such a form of labor which was based on curtailing or denying of human rights, of human freedom. So finally, the Emperor of Spain was forced to legally ban the forced labor or slavery, but made arrangements by a secret decree for its continuance. So although outwardly it was said that forced labor is banned, but somehow it continued in hidden ways or in secret ways. And in 1609, the government gave full freedom to the local people. So the natives of America was given full freedom by 1609. And the Christians and non-Christians alike, so both the Christians and non-Christians were given this full freedom. But the European settlers forced the king to revoke this law and to permit enslavement of natives once again. But very sadly, again the Europeans put pressure on the king to call back or recall this declaration of freedom. and to give them the right to enslave natives or to keep these natives as slaves. And the cattle farming on lands, clearing of forests, created demand for cheap labor. But the local people resisted enslavement. But by the 17th century, the local or the native people resisted or opposed this kind of slavery. And the Europeans now turned to Africa between 1550s and the 1880s. Over 36 lakh African slaves were imported into Brazil. So the large amount of or the large numbers of slaves who came to America during the period between 1550 and the 1880s, that is the 16th to the 19th century, belonged to Africa, because by then the Native Americans had completely opposed and showed their unreadiness to work as slaves. So from then on, African slaves were imported to regions of America like Brazil. And this amounted to almost half the total number of African slaves in the Americas. And in AD 1750, that is in the 18th century, there were many landowners who owned as many as 1,000 slaves. So by then, there were landowners in America who could own more than 1,000 slaves. And slavery was legally abolished in Brazil in 1880. And it is only long afterwards, that is by 1880, that slavery got abolished legally in Brazil. And the European traders, with the help of Africans, captured young men and women to sell them in Americas in return for crops imported from South America. So the poor Africans, both men and women, were captured and sold as slaves for the imported crops from South America. So these are what European traders did. And gradually the movement for the abolition of slavery in all parts of the world were started. So but soon we could see that there were people who were raising objections against such a cruel system, where a human being was kept chained or in bondage, and he or she was denied any kind of right. So the movements of abolition of slavery started gaining potential in different parts of the world, and slavery was abolished in most parts of the world by 19th century. So it took more than 3 or 4 centuries for this to get legally banned or to abolish such a discriminatory system. And slavery was abolished in France in 1789 following the French Revolution, and in Russia in 1917 after the Russian Revolution. So some questions are, how did the discovery of South America lead to the development of European colonialism? So this is something which we have already seen. So in the colonies and slave trade, we saw the consequences of the discovery of the new continents. So the influx of gold and silver led to expansion of trade activities of Europe. That is the first reason. And countries bordering Atlantic, other than Spain and Portugal, there was England, France, Belgium and Holland, who took advantage and established joint stock companies and sent out trading expeditions. And how in regions like Brazil and other parts, when the native population stopped working as slaves or showed their resistance, slaves from the African region was brought to work as cheap labor, and that also to a large extent helped them produce a lot more and keep their profits large. So all these points you will have to include while you are looking at this question of the discovery of South America and the development of European colonialism. So you have to say how exploration of new lands led to colonization of these lands, and colonization led to large scale mining or discovery of gold and silver, and this gold and silver and its coming to Europe had helped in expanding trade and in establishing more industries all over Europe, which could then produce for the demand or to meet the demand of the world. They could make large production and heighten or improve its wealth. So these are the important benefits which Europeans got with the discovery of this new land. And that's how colonialism developed. And every other country bordering the Atlantic felt that it was important for them to kind of explore America and establish its colonies, because it helped them establish joint stock companies and have control over people by establishing their colonies in this place. So all these points are to be taken into account when you're talking about discovery of South America and the development of European colonialism. And the other side of the story is what is happening to the Native Americans and the disastrous effect it had on the population of Native America, where from 70 million it got reduced to 3.5 million within a period of 150 years of their coming to contact with the European colonizers. And the impact of European settlement on South America. So this is what the question refers to. Here you'll have to give the details of the tragic consequences which such a confrontation had. So the destruction of native population is one important point. So psychologically and physically they were badly hit. And the depopulation, that is population disappeared. From 70 million it came down to 3.5 million within a period of 150 years. And cultures like Arawaks, Inca and Aztecs completely disappeared due to large number of wars and epidemic like smallpox which came from the old world. So these were all the tragic consequences of their contact with the Europeans, which can also be termed the impact of European settlement on South America, which was tragic and disastrous. So now we come to the last topic in this chapter, which is historians' viewpoint on slave trade. So what are the historians and scholars' opinion on the slave trade? Who supported it? Whether they were against it? What are their arguments in as far as the slave trade and the expansion in America by the Europeans were concerned? So in USA, the importation of slaves was banned by Congress in 1808. So it is by the 19th century that the Congress is banning the importation or the trade of slaves. And gradually a domestic slave trade developed and American slavery became self-sustaining. So although importation was not allowed, within America those slaves who were already there, from 1550 onwards we see slaves are being taken from African region, and the slave trade is flourishing in America. So the domestic slave trade continued and became self-sustaining in America by the 19th century. It doesn't completely stop, is what is important. And the domestic slave trade was conducted by both sea and land routes. slaves chained together in pairs were common sights in the South. So this was still not legally banned. Although importation or taking of slaves from Africa to America was banned, within America the slave trade continued. And we see that slaves were taken from one place to another via sea and land routes, and many times they were chained together in pairs, and this was a common scene everywhere, especially in the southern part of America. And the overland slave trade generally developed from Tidewater, Virginia and the Carolinas, where slaves bred during operations were highly profitable too. And after 1836, the slave trade extended to Texas. So within the Americas, it was flourishing in the 19th century, with the slave trade gaining a lot of momentum in this period. And James Buckingham, a British parliamentarian, was a strong opponent of slave trade. So during this period, a personality who was a British parliamentarian who was against the slave trade was James Buckingham. And he wrote in his book that the title of the book is The Slave States of America. And in his book, he gives an account of the domestic slave trade in the USA. So within USA, how slaves were traded from one place to another. And under the caption, gangs of slaves journeying to be sold in southern market. So he gives a very detailed account of the slave trade in America, and the caption which he used was gang of slaves journeying to be sold in southern market. And through his work, he showed his opposition to the practice of slave trade within America. So the final topic includes the independence of South American colonies. So how does these colonies attain independence or gain freedom from the European colonizers? When did it happen and how did it take place? So the people rose in revolts against the rulers in South American colonies by the 19th century. So see, from the 15th till the 19th century, almost for 4 centuries, the people of America remained under the control of European colonizers, and by 19th century they revolt against it. The Spanish and Portuguese rule in these colonies came to an end, and in 1776 AD, 13 North American colonies revolted against the British. So by this last section of the 18th century, 13 North American colonies revolted against the British and kind of asked for freedom from the British rule. And these 13 colonies came out victorious, and the United States of America came into existence. So this is how USA becomes an independent state. That is, they demand freedom from the British rule, and these 13 colonies free themselves and come together as the United States of America. And now South America is called Latin America because the Spanish and Portuguese languages are parts of the Latin family of the languages. So even till today, the parts of South America is termed Latin America because all this region for long was colonized majorly by Spain and Portugal, or the colonizers of Spain and Portugal. So because of which the dominant languages in this region is Spain and Portuguese, and because Spain and Portuguese belong to the Latin family of languages, the place within America which was ruled by these colonizers are called, or they use the term Latin America to refer to these geographical spaces which was once ruled by the Spanish and the Portuguese colonizers. So now you know why they are called Latin Americans. So because of this language connection which it has, because of the dominant languages like Spanish and Portugal spoken over there, and these belong to the Latin family of languages. So this is how this connection works. And the inhabitants of Latin America are mostly native Europeans who are called Creoles. So most of the inhabitants who are settled down in the Latin America have had their ancestors once in Europe, or European ancestors. And some are of African origin also, because of the large slave trade which had happened. There are people who have had African origin or descendants, or their ancestors from Africa. And most of them are followers of the Catholic Church. Their culture is mixture of elements of native traditions and European ones. So by now, there is so much of intermingling of the native and the Europeans that it is now become a mixture of both native culture and the European culture. Yes, so this is the last topic within this chapter, where we could see that how these colonies finally get their freedom and free themselves from the European colonial rule. So this was what we had in short, that how this confrontation of two cultures took place and what the causes of that confrontation was. And we saw by 15th century there is an increased interest in exploring new places, and the inventions like the magnetic compass and other printing press helps in giving people an interest, or implanting in the minds of people an interest in exploring new areas. And with the help of compass, now the explorers and adventurers could think of going to faraway places and discovering them. And in Spain and Portugal, three major reasons like religious, political, and economic factors play a major role in making them take the lead to discover new places. And we saw how they finally reached the New World, or the America, under the initiative of Columbus, who thinks that he had discovered parts of Asia, that is East Indies, but he had actually reached the New World, or the America. And we saw how this, when two cultures come together, what kind of impact it has. Europeans had come here in search of goods, in search of gold and silver, and the innocent people of Native America was not clear of what the motives of Europeans were. And we saw small subsistence economics like Arwaks, how they were brutally tortured, and then finally how they become extinct because of the cruel treatments they are subjected to by the European colonizers. And the kingdoms like Aztecs and Inca, they also face the same fate because of wars and epidemics like smallpox. Somehow there is so much of destruction that the population of Native America goes down from 70 million to 3.5 million in the period of 150 years. But still, for the Europeans, it was a huge gain. They gained a lot of profit. Following Spain and Portugal, the other parts of Europe bordering the Atlantic Ocean, like England, Holland, France, all of them come to establish their colonies in America, and they also make a lot of profit, and they establish stock exchange companies. So that's how this whole capitalist mode of production, based on cheap labor which they got from enslavement of human beings, become the base of their economy and give them a boom in the economy and help them reap a lot of profit. So finally, the people of the America is able to come out of this exploitation and the control of Europeans by the end of 18th and the beginning of 19th century. And we see by the end of the 18th century, the 13 colonies in North America free themselves from the British rule and establish themselves as the United States of America. And later, other parts also uh, take back their freedom and establish themselves as free countries from the European colonizers. So I hope this journey helped you in understanding how confrontation or encounters of culture take place, and in the history of the world how important this confrontation between the Europeans and Americans was. Thank you.